And the ramifications of the US government shutdown continue for President Trump. Let's bring in political commentator Peter Mathews, who's in California, joins us now live. Thanks for your time. A 3-week reprieve now for US government workers, as we've heard, the 15th of February. Do you think that the president would actually consider another shutdown?
It is possible, but he seems to have indicated that he doesn't think that the Congress is going to be able to negotiate a deal that he could sign. He just came out and said today that he might have to actually declare a state of national emergency in order to get the money for the wall. He's adamant he's going to get the money for the wall one way or the other. So it's very possible he'd avoid the shutdown part and go for national emergency if he needs to. And that is quite interesting, another ball of wax.
There have been a number of Republicans who have come out over the weekend very concerned about how the president is viewed to have handled this, the way that this is looking in terms of his much taunted skills trying to negotiate with the other side, let alone world leaders. What's the view on that?
Well, the most prominent one was the commentator, Ann Coulter, who called him a wimp. She said, until now, George H.W. Bush was the wimp. And now Mr. Trump has been outdone by he's the new wimp now. So it's just very derogatory in a sense. And she and other right-wing people like the Tea Party members of the Republican Party are going to be very concerned, upset about this rather, and no telling how they will react as far as his support goes. But other people like Lindsey Graham is trying to downplay it as if it wasn't such a defeat for him, because Lindsey Graham had warned President Trump earlier that if you do not build the wall, if you give up on that, you're never going to become have a second term in the presidency. And now Graham is backtracking a bit and saying, well, the president is doing a tactical move now and he'll still be able to build the wall eventually. And the president is still strong. So there are different reactions on the Republican side and the conservative side on what the president has done, actually. It's not a very good situation for the president, though. Overall.
No, it's a pretty difficult situation for the president because on the one hand, over the next 3 weeks, you'll have Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats no doubt sticking to their line because it is widely viewed as having worked. But for the president, he really struggles in that regard, trying to hold up his support base. So many people voted for Donald Trump because they wanted that wall, but many of them don't want to see a government shutdown, which affects 800,000 people. So what does he strategically try to do between now and February 15 to keep the conservative base happy that voted for him to get that wall done, but also try to budge and move the Democrats without having to push another shutdown?
It's going to be very tough for him because if he does, in fact, declare a state of emergency, because that may be the only way he can get the money if he decides to do that, if he doesn't want to accept the Democratic offer of a couple of $1 billion for security of the border, but not a wall. Democrats are adamant to not call it a wall or not to build a wall with the money for various reasons. I mean, Nancy Pelosi called it a moral wrong to do that. Other Democrats are looking at it as they lose support among the Latino voters, and also it's just not a good thing for the policy of their party as being an inclusive party. So President Trump has actually threatened to go to a state of emergency, which means the National Emergency Act will be guiding the process because there are many, many laws on the books that allow the president to declare emergencies in different situations. For example, a hurricane emergency versus a riot versus other kinds of emergencies. And he could draw on any of those emergencies. He has to actually declare which aspect of the emergency legislation he's going to be using and go forward with that and then define it clearly. But he could even do something that's as extreme as declaring martial law if he has to. And that would be a very horrible thing. Even the National Emergency Declaration will be opposed by Congress, more than likely, most of Congress. And they'll go to the Supreme. The Supreme Court will have to decide whether he's acting constitutionally or not. It's a very critical situation right now, big crisis coming up.
Are the Democrats just playing politics here, though? Because there is a partial wall, as we know, along the Mexico border. We have seen it. We've seen the president visiting it. We've seen a number of reporters standing in front of it. And much of that wall was actually funded by President Obama. So how come it was OK back then, but not now?
Because it's argued that wall, it actually is segments of a wall. It's not an entire wall of 2,000 miles. It's here and there and more with natural barriers connecting some of it. So the Democrats don't see it as a complete wall where it's blocking out any kind of interaction between the U.S. and Mexico. And it's a symbolism of an entire wall that he wants to build. It's going to cost over $26 billion. He only wants $5.7 billion as a down payment. Democrats say we won't even start on that road because we're never going to build the full wall. So you may see that as a double standard, but the Democrats don't see it that way. They see it as this country is a country that's of inclusion. It's a nation of immigrants. It should look at people who come here undocumented, the economic process of why they come here, and try to give them a path to citizenship, as President Reagan did. The different approach to immigration reform, and some moderate Republicans are for that as well. That's the problem for President Trump. He's actually split his coalition. there are some of the more right-wing Republicans who are very adamant about having the wall built all the way across, and other Republicans who would rather work with Democrats on coming up with a moderate, measured type of immigration reform. And that's a real problem for the president politically right now, especially with the next election just a year and a half away, so to speak, 2 years at the most.
We saw the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, last week call the president's bluff when it came to that State of the Union address, which was meant to be happening Tuesday in the United States, of course. Now that the shutdown is temporarily over, has there been any word on whether that will go ahead, or is it, given the fact that it could be back on again February 15 in terms of that partial shutdown? What's happening there?
It's always possible last minute they can bring it back again, but you'll need a lot of preparation for that, and that's just around the corners on Tuesday, I believe. And so at this point, the State of the Union address is not on. It's set, what Nancy Pelosi said that it will not happen earlier is in place right now. It's not supposed to happen the way it's set up right now. And unless there's some miracle of negotiating a budget quickly and getting it done without the border wall, which will please the Democrats, Pelosi won't invite him to come to the House of Representatives when she has to provide the invitation because she's a speaker. So it's very unlikely it'll happen on Tuesday.
Let's talk about the situation, of course, that's been happening as well with Roger Stone in that Mueller investigation, saying that he will certainly testify honestly if he cooperates with Robert Mueller's ongoing investigation into collusion. But Roger Stone, an incredibly colourful character, but another domino to fall around President Trump.
A very, very important domino because he's one who's known the president the longest. He's been with the president for several decades, actually, and when they're very young men. And he'd been someone who, when the president first said he was going to run and thought of running, quite a few years ago, Roger Stone was right there to advise him, to bring in some campaign people, and to line up people like Manafort to be his chairman. Roger Stone played a big role in designing the presidential campaign. And then, of course, he worked for a few months, I think, and then he was, he separated and left President Trump's campaign. But he's always been around as an unofficial advisor. And at the times when Trump needs him, he's gone to bat for the president. In fact, that's what this whole controversy is about, that Mr. Mueller is arguing in the indictment that Mr. Stone had actually helped to arrange, went to WikiLeaks and found out when the emails were going to be dumped next, and he was directed by someone possibly from the campaign itself. We don't know who directed that official. It's very controversial right now and convoluted. We don't know all the facts, but it doesn't look very good right now. And Mr. Stone, at first he was very defiant. He said, "I will never bear false witness against the President Trump." Now he's saying, I will cooperate in an honest way with the special counsel. So that's quite a change. We'll have to wait and see what happens in actuality. You can't trust any of these statements, to be honest with you.
Yeah, let's talk about Venezuela quickly as well, because we've seen a lot happening there too. The United States considering the idea of actually military intervention. We've heard last year when President Trump was asked about that, he wouldn't really clarify, kind of hinted but didn't say anything certain. We're now this afternoon here in Australia seeing a number of reports from people and aides around the president saying that they have been asked by the president in recent times about just how that would work out. On what basis could the United States go into Venezuela in terms of military intervention? Because no doubt it is a difficult situation. Some saying it's a dictatorship. Obviously, there are huge protests from the opposition trying to get rid of President Maduro. But for the United States to get involved, how would that be seen?
Most of Americans who would not want us to intervene militarily whatsoever. And the United States has a very history that was quite sordid of intervention in Latin America with many other countries like Guatemala, for example. We helped to support a military coup there in 1954. In Chile, in Nicaragua, we were involved. So there's been this defensive posture for many Latin American countries, the United States, not to get involved militarily. But if they go to the Organization of American States, they might be able to work out some kind of diplomatic solution to try to get him to resign and get a new president in there. But the United States should not be seen as choosing the Venezuelan president. And I think that President Trump should be very cautious about this, even though the government that's in power now, the Maduro government, has not been that popular because of economic reasons. And the U.S. was also involved with that, with certain types of economic sanctions against Venezuela because we didn't like what they were doing in terms of democracy. We do know that Hugo Chavez was very popular among a large segment of the population when he had the oil money coming in and could put in a lot of social programs for the poor people. That went away when the oil prices dropped and Maduro was stuck with a very budget that was in deficit. So it's a major problem. We should try to work with Venezuela, in my view. Try to solve this.
Okay, Peter Mathews there in California. Always appreciate your thoughts. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it.
After the break.